but kegi on both of those, he's going to sound good on the one but amazing on the other. So when the skill is the same, but the guitar is the only thing that's different, the quality of the music of the beginner guitar can't match the quality of the music from the master level guitar. Next, please. Same thing with evidence. When there are two things: the intrinsic quality, the nature of how the evidence is derived, and then in that study design, how well it was gathered. Next, please. So some studies are inherently better than others, improving the outcome. Why is that? Because they can identify the cause-effect relationship more accurately, just by their very design. When you can control everything except the difference, the one difference between the two groups, then that's the ideal. Well, we can't always study those things that way, but that's the idea. So this is a classic pyramid of evidence. There have been some evolutions to this, but I think it's helpful to give a concept. At the lowest level, expert opinion, background information, physiologic reasoning, and then observational studies. That means where you can't control, you just have to observe what's going on and try and factor things out. Randomized controlled trials and so forth. Just to give a concept, now it's very, very important. Just because the evidence quality is low doesn't mean it's irrelevant. It may be all you have. And it may be life-changing. But the whole idea is to recognize what kind of quality of evidence do we have. Next. But how well is the evidence gathered? And again, at the workshops, Dr. Guy has illustrated this. A well-done study of inherently inferior quality, like kegi on the cheap guitar, can provide stronger evidence for something than a poorly done study of inherent or superior quality. A critical distinction, but again, we can all understand this. So let's talk about some ashtrays. Next. I call this section Overdiagnosis and Surrogate Ashtray Eradication to Prevent Lung Cancer. Next. So a surrogate marker, what is that? It's a substitute measure associated with some important outcome. And the goal is that by addressing the substitute measure, we can actually get a good outcome or prevent a bad outcome. And it's a vital concept that we use all the time. Next, please. So the challenge is the surrogate marker is only reliable if it has a strong association with the actual outcome, and if intervening on the surrogate marker makes a meaningful change in the outcome. Those are the two necessary components. So what would be an example of a good surrogate? How about tire wear patterns and tread thickness linked reliably with blowouts and accidents? Okay, you know, if your cords are showing through on the tire, you've got no tread, it's bald, you're in danger. But that's not a blowout, it's a surrogate for blowout. Intervening actually makes a difference. Next, please. What's a bad surrogate? Well, ashtrays are linked reliably with emphysema and lung cancer. So we're going to intervene on ashtrays and remove them from homes and public places, and what difference will that make for lung cancer and emphysema? Probably almost none. So it's a crappy surrogate. What are examples in healthcare? Blood pressure, glucose measurements, bone density, body mass index, cholesterol, prostate-specific antigen for prostate cancer, and the list goes on. Next, please. Here's a question. One question. At what point does intervening on a reliable surrogate marker, I'm not talking about a bad one, I'm talking about a reliable one. At what point does it make a meaningful difference in the desired outcome? So where we get back to this significant versus clinically relevant versus important to me. Next, please. So where did all this start? As far as I know, it started in the 1960s when the Veterans Administration did a collaborative trial of people with severely elevated but no symptoms blood pressure. And these readings make my blood pressure go up. Diastolic blood pressure of 115 to 129. We rarely see that in people on the street. And this was sustained. It wasn't just an isolated reading when they broke their femur or something. So they found that these people went on in a fairly short period of time, like within a year and a half, 2 years, to develop really bad outcomes. What? Heart attack, stroke, death, blindness, heart failure. And intervening on this surrogate made a huge, and I mean huge, reduction. You can read about it in Dr. Welch's book, Overdiagnosed, Making People Sick in the Pursuit of Health. But what if your diastolic blood pressure is not 120 or 110 or 100 or 95? What if it's 92? What if it's 86? Does intervening then on that surrogate marker bring the same magnitude of effect? No. You know, in the studies I mentioned from the VA, I believe after a year and a half, it was something approximating 1 in every 3 patients that got treated had was saved from one of these bad outcomes. That's enormous. We rarely see that in evidence. And what happens when you treat the lower values? Well, you don't get that same kind of 1 in 3 benefit. So why is that? This is from Dr. Welch's book. And if there's only one resource that you could read, I think, out of everything on that list, at this point, it would probably be this book, Overdiagnosed, Making People Sick in the Pursuit of Health. And he has some videos online. He's quite humorous as well. Milder abnormalities are less likely to cause problems than severe abnormalities are. I think we can probably all relate to that. People with milder abnormalities stand, therefore, to benefit less from treatment than those with severe abnormalities. But is that really the way it's presented? I think practically speaking, a lot of times I think it gets to be much more binary. You know, your blood pressure is high, we got to treat it, you will benefit, but it's a continuum. So working this out then, if people with milder abnormalities are less likely to have problems arising from their abnormalities, that means you've got to treat more of them to prevent one meaningful outcome. That, by the way, is called the number needed to treat. People with milder abnormalities and who are treated, therefore, are more likely to receive no benefit from that treatment. We're going to see this illustrated at the end of the lecture, I think, very powerfully. So what is overdiagnosis then? It's when people who are diagnosed, or when people are diagnosed with conditions that will never actually cause any meaningful bad outcome. I really want to burn this in. This is arguably the most important thing to come out of this lecture today. So what are the dangers? Well, if more people are unnecessarily treated, that means you're going to have more instances of meaningful bad outcomes, not from the thing itself, but from the treatment. Next. So you could have physical side effects. You could have a, 0.5% times 100 is not very much, but if it's a 0.5% times 100,000 because we've changed the standard and now everybody's getting treated, well, now you're starting to see significant amounts of these negative outcomes. I think the emotional negative effects, and particularly viewing oneself as diseased rather than well, is critical. I don't think this is emphasized enough. This is everything. And I think it costs a ton to the nation. I mean, why? Just step back. Why do we spend so much on health care and see so little for it? I mean, we have to be blind not to say that that's the state of affairs. And I think arguably maybe the worst aspect of overdiagnosis is that it reinforces wrong and dangerous ideas of health, disease, and treatment. Next, please. Again, getting back to who or what defines the normal reference point. What happens if the cutoff for normal has changed? This happened for cholesterol a number of years ago. It went from 240 to 200, I believe. Well, millions suddenly become patients with a condition. And many of these will be treated without benefit because the abnormality is mild, and those, I would say, who are going to be more altruistic pushing this kind of agenda are going to say, yes, but we're trying to capture the ones who could benefit. Yes, at what expense? So I would ask, what happens to the health of a nation when health is largely, I should have put largely in there, largely equated with attaining surrogate marker goals? I really want to burn that home. This is a good concept. It's a vital concept. Surrogate markers, when they're properly used, are essential. I'm not speaking against them. I'm speaking of their misuse. So I want to look at 2 clinical examples. We're going to take a patient that's the same. We'll say they're 65, because we're going to do this on that web page at the end. They want to control A1C, lipids, and blood pressure, and we want to look at their progress after 6 to 12 months. So patient A does diet changes, meets up with Dr. Fish for that, meets up with Dr. Ventry for some light exercise, talks to Dr. Wise about stress reduction, reviews medications with Clint back there, does light exercise, and goes to senior yoga with Lori Chandler. All right, the other one does no significant lifestyle changes, but now takes metformin, Januvia, and glipizide, 3-drug blood pressure therapy, and atorvastatin for cholesterol. Standard of care, right? So what's the results? Let's say patient A, let's call this 12 months, 25-pound weight loss. That's modest and consistent. I would be very happy with that because it means they're being on an even keel. Knees don't hurt quite as much as they did. They're more mobile and flexible. Lower fall risk because their balance and coordination are better. I got this idea from a patient who came, and before he left the office, he said, hey, I want to show you something. He's walking out. He does this. stands on one leg. He said, I couldn't do that before, and he told me he'd gone to Lori Chandler's class. I didn't know the lights went on. So his mood is improved, his sleep is better, his stress reduced. He made some simple schedule changes. His A1C for 65, that's pretty close to goal. 6.7, LDL 95, purists would argue it should be lower. Systolic blood pressure 128. The other patient has a 5-pound weight gain, knees are still stiff, their activity tolerance is mildly worsened. They're still off balance at times, and the ice is slippery, and boy, anybody who's ever dealt with a hip fracture knows what the consequences of that could be, etc. You can see here, all of this stuff is no better or worse, but hey, they met their goal surrogate markers. A1C is 6.2, LDL 74, and systolic blood pressure 118. Isn't that a triumph? All right, so I would ask, who actually benefits from overdiagnosis? And again, I don't have to point fingers and say, oh, you're pushing overdiagnosis. I'm just saying this is a fact of our healthcare system. Do the patients benefit? Well, no, you can't, in the nature of the case, benefit when you're diagnosed with something that will ultimately never negatively impact you. Of course, you don't know until you get to the end, but it's a matter of statistics and risk calculation. But I would say at least some of those who are profiting from industrialized healthcare definitely benefit from overdiagnosis. And what are the natural outworkings in our society of this approach on a financial, regulatory level, quality and availability of true healthcare, relationally with patients, with each other, so forth? There's a lot of downstream effect from this. Next, please. So I just asked one other question, getting back to the tire tread analogy. If a local tire company waged a huge campaign pushing statistically significant interventions for tire tread depth that actually only offered meaningful benefit to a few customers, I mean, it's true, if your tire is 40% down and you buy tires now, you probably have a little lower chance of blowout than the person who doesn't buy them. I think they would be in danger of being put out of business because people would say, you guys are shysters, right? I went to Les Schwab a while back with my new car and I wanted different tires, and Kevin, the assistant manager there, said, you don't need new tires. I mean, he's got at least 3 years on them. That built trust. So now if I come back and he makes recommendations, I say, he was looking for my best interest.